counseling to the family and from trying to get the family to become a better parenting and child unit.
The new legislation may be a solution to the crowded courtrooms in dependency court and the overwhelming caseloads carried by social workers. But the final verdict will be decided by the children themselves. More kids may stay at home, but will they be safe from abuse? But controversy over the new legislation does not end here. Under the new laws, parents may now legally spank their children as long as there is no evidence of serious physical injury.
It's a reaction to the state's tremendous involvement in the family, and parents are coming back and saying, I have a right to do in my family what I consider appropriate.
Up to now, some young social worker with no experience of children and who has forgotten what it's like to be a child, looks at a child, sees a bruise, this is abuse. Listens to a child say that he or she was spanked by the parents, that's abuse. Now, the law tells us what it takes to constitute abuse. Regular spanking with a hand on the bottom is not abuse.
My experience is that if you tell some people, not most people, some people, hey, it's okay, and this law says it's okay for you to hit your child, there's an implied sanctioning of hitting kids. I don't know how hard you have to hit a kid on the bottom to cause serious physical harm, but I'll tell you, it would have to be awfully hard.
I find it very difficult to believe that she fabricated this story out of such intense hatred, willing to see her father go to jail, if this was not in fact true. We have two stories, and I'm called upon to believe one or the other. The question really is...
The new child abuse laws may change the nature of the cases Robert Levanter sees, but it will not change the most difficult task before the social workers, lawyers, and psychologists in this courtroom, to reunify this and every other family coming into dependency court.
And what I would like to do,
a tough job, because they must do it by law in 18 months. If they fail, the child may go up for adoption. The job gets tougher because there are few alternatives for healing families.
Social workers.
In this case, the only options may be short-term foster care for the child and therapy for the father. Levanter calls case lawyers and psychologists into his chambers to help him decide what to do.
I'm now looking at a supplemental report with medical evidence that put me in a position of having to assume that molestation in fact did occur and it was chronic. If she goes back home, what, in your opinion, is the risk that she would be molested again?
Well, because communicates to me no fear towards her father, and I have interviewed her about this specifically. You know, are you afraid of your father? Are you aware of the fact that if he in fact is the perpetrator, that there's a risk that he'll abuse you again? If not abuse you sexually, abuse you emotionally because of the amount of control and power that he may interpret he has because of what happened. She has no fear of returning home. She has no fear of being in the same home of her father.
Do you think that if he was not in a program of therapy, that it would be advisable to return home at this time?
No, I do not. I think he needs to definitely be in a program of therapy.
Therapy is such a universal option in these courts. It's almost ordered in almost every case, either parenting classes or some individual therapy. The theory behind it is that if a parent has been neglecting or abusing a child, talking is going to help the parent deal with that problem.
The 19th century child savers believed reforming immigrants was the best cure for child abuse. By the turn of the century, young social workers took this idea a step further. They would cure child abuse by ending poverty. Today, we still believe the emotional and physical stresses of poverty create a fertile ground for child abuse. But we have, yet again, expanded the idea of what causes child abuse and where to find the cure. In the 1980s, we viewed child abuse as a psychosocial disease that can be treated with therapy. But placing this much faith in the curative powers of therapy, particularly in the case of sexual abuse, may be as fragile a notion as the figures in a dollhouse.
We assume that we're going to be able to take care of this problem in 18 months. And that's just not the way therapy is. It's not the way families are. And it's very hard to fit this kind of a problem into neat little boxes that have time limits on them.
Dr. Karen Saywitz is an associate professor of children's psychiatry at the University of California, Los Angeles.
And I wouldn't say that it's not beneficial. On the other hand, it's also not a panacea. It's not necessarily the cure for society, that we should make child abuse no longer be a crime, or decriminalize it, and just assume that we can send all our families to treatment and that will take care of the problem either.
This videotape from a National Center for Child Abuse shows a young mother mistreating her infant son by slapping the child's face and pulling his nose.
The baby's shut down. He responds only when he can't breathe, and you can see him draw within himself, not reaching out to his mother at all. The concern is that these are all kinds of behaviors that leave no injuries, that there's no physical sign of any of the abuse that this baby is experiencing every time he's in mother's lap.
The mother knew she was being videotaped, and according to Dr. Claire Haynes Seaman, abusive behavior like this is often so ingrained or unconscious, it can take years of therapy to reverse.
If parents are denying that they've abused their children and they don't recognize a problem in the way they're treating their children, their relationship with their child, and don't really want help, then I think therapy is not useful, is not helpful. They will go and they will comply, but I'm not sure that they will make enough progress or any progress that would really change the relationship with the child.
In a similar setting, a father seems to gain sexual gratification from touching his infant son's genitals. It is, says Dr. Haynes Seaman, an example of subtle abuse that may later become more aggressive and violent. But subtle, secretive, or obvious, the result is the same. The child feels unwanted, unloved.
It's not just the beating of children that we should be concerned about, it's the relationship with the child. And children get injuries falling off bicycles that are probably more painful and hurt worse than what parents may do. But it's the parent's attitude toward the child, not loving the child, not valuing the child. It's not just changing behaviors, that we have to change people and their perception of themselves and other people. And that takes much longer, much more in-depth therapy, much more intense therapy.
We can't be sure that children won't be re-abused once we reunify the families. We can try to empower the children so that they feel like if that starts to happen, they can do something about it and they can tell the appropriate person. We can help the parents start to anticipate the kinds of things that trigger the feelings that make them want to do that, to stop it farther down the line before it ever gets to that point.
As long as that denial persists and people are not in therapy, that the risk of re-abuse is great, as well as the failure to properly address the problem, which brings this case before the court, even if it is only as to why such false allegations would have been made repeatedly to various people.
Levanter has decided to place his hopes in therapy. If the father goes to counseling, the child can return home on a trial basis. Levanter will review the case in 60 days, but he is still not convinced the family will stay together.
If the molestation, in fact, has occurred, if the family is going to be reunified, they will probably have to acknowledge that the molestation occurred, that it's a problem, so they can address that problem and move on with their lives in a way that, so it's not likely to occur again. It may be wishful thinking to hope that all these issues are going to be resolved in therapy. But really, that's all we have to work with.
For Ella Martin, the end of this case is like many others in dependency court, a bittersweet victory.
Yes, I won the case, but I felt the cost was rather expensive. I do not like hurting children, and in this case, the child was molested by her father, and I felt that the system had re-molested her again. Now we have to go into the healing situation, or the phase of the case